In the bustling heart of the Galactic Federation's capital, Commander Jaylen Mars stood at the back of the Grand Hall, an unassuming observer among the galaxy's elite. Today's assembly pulsed with a palpable tension, a stark contrast to the usual procedural monotony. The vast chamber, encircled by translucent steel columns, hummed with the whispered speculations of hundreds. Above, the domed ceiling projected live images of Earth, a planet of vibrant blues and greens, now at the center of an unprecedented galactic debate. Jaylen's gaze was fixed on the holographic podium where Ambassador Ilex was about to speak. The ambassador, a lithe figure with skin the color of deep space, cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the murmur like a laser. "Esteemed members," Ilex began, his tone grave, "recent findings suggest Earth's youngest inhabitants possess capabilities far exceeding our initial projections. Capabilities that could, if left unchecked, pose a significant threat." The room fell silent. All eyes were on the swirling images beside Ilex, displaying human children engaging in activities that defied logical explanation. Scenes of toddlers strategizing like seasoned generals, adolescents manipulating complex quantum algorithms, all broadcasted for the universe to see. Jaylen felt a chill run through him, despite the warmth of the packed hall. These were not just any children. They were anomalies that could alter the balance of power in the universe. As a veteran commander trained to face unknown cosmic threats, even he could not suppress the flicker of alarm that these revelations sparked. Beside him, a counselor from Zeta Prime, covered in shimmering scales, whispered to his neighbor, his voice barely a hiss, "Could our own youth compete with such beings?" The question lingered, adding weight to the already heavy air. Ambassador Ilex continued, "We have monitored and analyzed these phenomena, and the conclusion is unanimous. The human race, particularly its progeny, harbors potential that we cannot afford to ignore. We must decide our course of action." His gaze swept across the audience, seeking allies and gauging foes. Jaylen shifted, his military instincts kicking in. The Federation might see these children as a curiosity, a problem to be solved or a resource to be exploited. But he saw them as something else, a potential catalyst for chaos or perhaps evolution. As murmurs began to swell around him again, his decision crystallized. He needed to understand this threat from up close, from within the heart of humanity itself. The assembly concluded with calls for stringent measures and further surveillance, but Jaylen was already formulating his own plan. As the delegates dispersed, he turned away, his mind racing with the implications of what he had learned. The commander knew his next mission would take him to Earth, to the eye of this unforeseen storm. He exited the hall into the quieter, shadowed corridors of the Federation complex. There, the true weight of his task settled on his shoulders like the cold of deep space. Beyond the politics and fear, a question haunted him. How do you prepare for a war against an enemy that is still learning how to tie its shoes? Jaylen strode through the shadowed corridors, the echoes of his boots on the metal floor marking his passage like a metronome. He could still taste the charged atmosphere of the assembly hall, a blend of fear and fascination that lingered on his palate like a bitter aftertaste. As he navigated the maze of the Federation complex, the scent of sterilized air mingled with the faint aroma of lubricant oil used in the maintenance of the building's ancient joints. In his private office, the walls were lined with screens displaying various data streams from across the galaxy. Jaylen sank into his chair, the leather cool against his skin, and activated the communication terminal. A hologram flickered to life, casting a blue glow that reflected in his determined eyes. The figure of General Varric, his superior and mentor, materialized before him. "Jaylen," Varric's voice was crisp, cutting through the quiet of the room. "I trust you've grasped the gravity of what we're facing." "Yes, sir," Jaylen replied, his voice steady despite the swirling uncertainty. "The reports on the children. There's something unsettling about their abilities. It's not just advanced. It's unprecedented." Varric nodded, his expression unreadable. "We need someone on the ground, Jaylen. Someone who can infiltrate, observe, and report without drawing attention. You're the best we have for such a delicate task." The weight of the assignment pressed down on Jaylen, yet his response was immediate, resolute. "I understand, sir. I'll prepare to depart for Earth at once." "There's more," Varric continued, the hologram's light casting sharp shadows across his aged face. "This mission isn't just reconnaissance. You're to connect with our contacts in the Earth Defense Corps. They've noticed similar anomalies but lack our perspective and resources." Jaylen processed this, his mind already racing through potential strategies. "I'll coordinate with them and try to integrate without compromising our objectives." "Be cautious, Jaylen," Varric warned. "These children, whatever their potential, are still unknown variables. We can't predict how they, or those around them, will react if they sense a threat." Acknowledging the counsel, Jaylen switched off the hologram and stood, feeling the room's silence envelop him like a cloak. He approached the window, looking out at the sprawling Federation capital below. Ships darted back and forth, their lights trailing in the evening gloom, a silent ballet in the void of space. His preparation was methodical. Every item packed had a purpose, from communication devices to personal armament, each piece a testament to his readiness. He donned his uniform, the fabric hugging his form like a second skin, designed to shield and support in equal measure. As he left his office, his senses were acutely aware of the ship's impending departure. The taste of anticipation was sharp on his tongue, the sights and sounds of the bustling port melding into a tapestry of impending action. He could feel the subtle vibrations of the ship through the soles of his boots, a constant reminder of the journey ahead. Boarding the vessel that would take him to Earth, Jaylen felt a final surge of resolve. Whatever awaited him, whatever challenges the mission held, he was ready. As the stars outside began to stretch into the blur of hyperspace, his focus was unyielding, his mission clear. Earth's mysterious children had no idea that the Federation's finest was coming, not as a conqueror, but as a guardian, a watcher in the shadows. As the ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, the horizon bloomed like a bruise in the early dawn, a spectrum of purples and oranges bleeding into each other. Jaylen Mars watched from the cockpit, the window a cold barrier against the swirling chaos of re-entry. The roar of the thermal shields grappling with the atmosphere filled the cabin, a stark reminder of the planet's unwelcoming embrace. The vessel touched down on a covert landing pad nestled in the Rocky Mountains, far from prying eyes. The air that greeted Jaylen as he disembarked was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and the impending bite of winter. It was a stark contrast to the recycled air of the ship, invigorating his senses and sharpening his focus. He was met by Agent Cole, a contact within the Earth Defense Corps, whose presence was as unobtrusive as his demeanor. "Commander Mars," Cole greeted, his voice a soft echo in the vastness of the mountainous landscape. "We've set up your observation post 2 clicks north of here." Their journey to the outpost was silent, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the frost-hardened ground, and the distant calls of wildlife, an auditory tapestry that made the alien visitor feel both welcome and deeply isolated. The outpost was a camouflaged facility, built to blend seamlessly with its wooded surroundings. Inside, the warmth was a welcome reprieve from the biting cold. Cole led Jaylen to a bank of monitors, each displaying feeds from various surveillance points around a nearby suburban area, his primary area of study. "This is where we've noticed unusual activities," Cole explained, pointing to a screen showing a playground full of children. Their laughter filtered through the speakers, a sound that should have been innocent, yet carried an undercurrent of something more, something that made Jaylen's skin prickle with apprehension. Jaylen spent the following days immersed in observation. He noted everything, the way the children communicated without words, their games that seemed random yet strangely tactical, and their interactions that appeared rehearsed and precise. Every so often he would catch a sequence that seemed out of place, a child pausing mid-play, their eyes unfocused, as if listening to an inaudible command. Late one evening, as shadows stretched like long fingers across the landscape, and the outpost settled into a hushed anticipation of night, Jaylen watched a particular group of children gathered under the dim glow of a street lamp. They were mapping out something in the dirt, their sticks tracing intricate patterns that resembled tactical formations. Cole watched alongside Jaylen, his earlier nonchalance replaced by a furrowed brow. "They're just playing, right?" he murmured, more to himself than to Jaylen. But Jaylen's reply was cut off as one child looked up directly into the camera, his gaze piercing through the digital ether to where Jaylen stood. The moment was fleeting, but it was enough to send a chill down Jaylen's spine, a visceral reminder that these were not mere children, but perhaps the architects of a new kind of battlefield. As they turned off the monitors for the night, the silence hung heavy, filled with the unspoken fears of what these observations meant. Jaylen lay in his bunk later, the darkness a thick blanket, and let the distant and muffled sounds of the earth lull him into a restless sleep. His dreams were a mosaic of war and play, indistinguishable and intertwined, painting a portrait of a world that might soon be irrevocably changed. Jaylen awoke to a frost-laced dawn, the light filtering through his window painting the room with a cold, silver hue. As he prepared for another day of surveillance, the tactile sensation of his uniform reminded him of the dual nature of his mission. Observer and protector, intertwined yet conflicting roles. He savored the robust flavor of coffee brewed from local beans, a small comfort amid the mounting tension. Outside, the crisp morning air carried a whisper of winter, its bite seeping through his clothes and urging him into motion. He joined Cole at the outpost, where the monitors already flickered to life with the day's first observations. Today, they were to witness an emergency drill at the local school, a routine test of the children's response to simulated dangers. What should have been a standard procedure, however, was about to offer Jaylen a glimpse into the extraordinary capabilities of these young subjects. As the drill commenced, the children assembled with a precision that belied their years. The alarm, a shrill, piercing sound that made Jaylen's ears ring, seemed to trigger an almost instantaneous transformation among the young participants. They moved with a choreographed grace, their small bodies darting between designated safe zones and rallying points with an efficiency that stunned both Jaylen and Cole. "They're just kids," Cole muttered under his breath, the words tinged with disbelief as he watched a boy barely in his fourth year command a group with the authority of a seasoned general. Jaylen's eyes narrowed, focusing on the boy, who was issuing orders with a calm certainty. Each command from his lips was followed without hesitation, each movement of his hand directing another piece of a well-oiled machine. This was no ordinary child's play. This was strategic maneuvering clothed in the innocence of a playground game. The smell of asphalt, warmed by the morning sun, mixed with the distant scent of freshly cut grass, crafting a deceptively tranquil backdrop to the operation unfolding before them. As the drill neared its end, Jaylen observed their faces, flushed with exertion, eyes bright with a cocktail of adrenaline and youthful exuberance. When the final whistle blew, signifying the end of the exercise, applause broke out among the observing teachers and some parents. But Jaylen and Cole exchanged a look that carried the weight of their unspoken concern. As they walked back to their outpost, the sound of children's laughter echoed behind them, a haunting melody that resonated with both hope and warning. Back at the outpost, Jaylen logged every detail of the morning's observations, his fingers tapping a staccato rhythm on the keyboard. The images from the monitors burned in his mind, their disciplined formations, their rapid adaptability, their unsuspecting potential for both creation and chaos. As dusk fell, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple, Jaylen stood by the window, gazing out at the quiet town. The peaceful scene belied the storm that might brew from the very innocence it cradled. In the stillness of the evening, he realized that these children could be the harbingers of a new era, for better or worse. This realization hung over him like the twilight, beautiful yet foreboding, a prelude to the night and all its unknowns. The twilight deepened into a dense tapestry of darkness as Jaylen lingered by the window, his thoughts shadowed by the implications of the children's capabilities. The coolness of the glass pressed against his forehead offered a faint respite from his spiraling thoughts. Inside the outpost, the quiet was occasionally pierced by the low murmur of Cole reviewing data, his figure a ghostly silhouette against the glow of the monitors. That night, an unexpected break in their routine arrived with a discreet ping on Jaylen's communicator, a message from an anonymous source within the local community. The cryptic text was succinct. Midnight, Old Mill by the river. Learn what the children guard. The enigmatic invitation ignited a flicker of anticipation under his simmering concerns. Jaylen slipped into the darkness, his senses heightened. The crisp night air carried the earthy aroma of decaying leaves and the distant rush of the river. Each step towards the old mill sharpened the scent of mold and damp wood, the once sturdy structures now surrendering to time's relentless march. The mill loomed before him, its dilapidated silhouette outlined by the moonlight. Inside, the air was thick with the must of forgotten histories and the faint trace of river mist. Shadows clung to the corners, as if hiding secrets. As his eyes adjusted, figures emerged from the darkness, children, their expressions serious, their postures tense. "You shouldn't be here," a boy stated, stepping forward. His voice, though soft, carried a firm command that seemed out of place on his young lips. Jaylen kept his tone even, non-threatening. "I'm here to understand, not to intrude." "Why meet here? What are you protecting?" The children exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them, before the same boy spoke again. "This place is ours. It's where we learn to think, to lead. Not all lessons are taught in classrooms." Around him, the mill's old gears and pulleys cast long, intricate shadows, mirroring the complex web of the situation. Here, in this abandoned place, the children honed skills unknown to their own parents, perhaps even to themselves. A girl stepped beside the boy, her gaze piercing under the stark moonlight. "We can show you, but you must promise not to interfere." Jaylen nodded, his commitment sealed by the gravity of her stare. The children began to demonstrate, using the mill's layout to simulate tactical exercises. Their strategies were sophisticated, their roles executed with a precision that belied their age. Jaylen observed, his reporter's instinct melding with a growing protective urge. These exercises were more than mere play. They were preparations, rehearsals for scenarios that their innocent minds should never have to contemplate. As he left the mill, the night air felt heavier, laden with the dew of impending dawn. The river whispered alongside his path, a constant murmur in the quiet night. The weight of what he'd witnessed settled around him like a cloak. Each step back to the outpost, a march toward decisions he wasn't sure he was ready to make. The mystery of the children's abilities was unraveling, yet each thread pulled revealed more depth, more complexity. As the first light of dawn tinged the sky, Jaylen knew this was just the beginning. What lay ahead was unknown, a path as twisted and obscured as the river's own winding journey through the darkness. As dawn broke, Jaylen returned to the outpost, the early light casting long, sharp shadows that sliced across the cold ground. His mind buzzed with the revelations of the night, the images of the children's clandestine exercises etched deeply into his consciousness. The morning air was brisk, laced with the invigorating scent of pine and the underlying, ever-present earthiness of damp soil. Inside, Cole awaited, his brow furrowed as he scanned the latest surveillance feeds. Noticing Jaylen's arrival, he glanced up, a question in his eyes. "Anything to report?" he asked, his voice low and cautious, as if afraid to disturb the delicate balance of the morning's peace. Jaylen nodded, settling into his chair with a soft sigh. "More than I expected. They're not just playing games, Cole. They're training. It's systematic, precise." The weight of his words hung between them, heavy with implications. Cole's fingers drummed a silent rhythm on the desk, his thoughts visibly churning. "And we're just now seeing this?" he finally said, skepticism and worry mingling in his tone. "It's hidden, protected under layers of innocence and normalcy. But the depth—" Jaylen paused, struggling to articulate the strange dichotomy of childlike innocence and calculated strategy. The screens flickered, bringing them back to the present task. Today, Jaylen would observe a game planned in a local park, a simulation of a community crisis, ostensibly a fire drill involving all the children from the local school. As the event unfolded, Jaylen watched intently, His senses sharpened, not just to the sights and sounds, but to the subtler nuances of the children's interactions. The park was a tableau of vibrant green, the grass a stark contrast to the children's bright clothing as they assembled with seeming randomness. Yet, beneath the chaos, Jaylen discerned the underlying structure. Commands were issued through quick glances and subtle hand signals, their movements choreographed with an expertise that belied their tender ages. From his vantage point, Jaylen could smell the fresh cut of the grass, the sweet tang of nearby wildflowers blending with the earthy aroma of the soil, disturbed by dozens of small, darting feet. The children's voices rose in a cacophony of excitement, yet underneath lay a disciplined cadence, a rhythm to their shouts and calls that spoke of rigorous training and inherent understanding. As the drill reached its climax, with the children successfully extinguishing the imaginary blaze, Jaylen's heart pounded with a mix of admiration and dread. These children were mastering skills some soldiers took years to refine. Returning to the outpost, the scent of the outdoors clung to his clothes, a stark reminder of the day's revelations. Cole met his gaze, his own eyes reflecting a turmoil of doubt and concern. "What are we dealing with here, Jaylen?" he asked, his voice a whisper, almost drowned out by the quiet hum of the equipment. Jaylen didn't have an answer, only more questions. As they debriefed, detailing each observed action and its potential implications, the mystery of the children's training deepened, layering intrigue upon intrigue. Each revelation suggested manipulation and foresight, far beyond what any had anticipated, pointing to unseen hands shaping these young minds into something formidable, perhaps unstoppable. As night fell, Jaylen felt the weight of impending decisions, how to act and how to intervene, if at all. The line between safeguarding and interfering blurred as the stakes grew ever higher, not just for him or Cole, but for the entire world. As night draped itself over the outpost, Jaylen paced the confines of his temporary haven, his thoughts as tangled as the undergrowth outside. The last slivers of sunlight slipped away, casting deep shadows that seemed to echo the growing darkness within him. Every piece of evidence, every observation pointed to a scenario far more complex and orchestrated than mere child's play or coincidental learning. The air inside was stale, thick with the remnants of the day's tension, and Jaylen opened a window to let in the night air. It flowed cool and crisp, carrying the whisper of the forest, the rustling of leaves, speaking the language of the unseen and unknown. Earlier in the evening, during their routine data exchange, Cole had brought up a new angle. "There's someone in the community, a teacher who might be willing to talk," he had said, his voice low, wary of being overheard even here. "She's noticed things, oddities in behavior, patterns that don't fit typical child development." Jaylen had nodded. The prospect of an insider's perspective, a thin ray of hope in the murk of their investigation. Now, as he prepared for the meeting, his senses were heightened, every nerve attuned to the night's potential to either clarify or complicate their mission. The meeting place was a small cafe, nestled on the outskirts of town, its sign flickering unsteadily, casting a stuttering glow on the gravel lot. Inside, the aroma of aged wood mingled with the scent of strong coffee, providing a backdrop of warmth against the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was already there, seated at a corner table, her eyes wary as she observed Jaylen approach. "Commander Mars." Her voice was a soft murmur, barely carrying over the gentle clinking of cups and hushed conversations of the late-night patrons. "Yes, and you must be Ms. Alder," Jaylen responded, extending a hand, which she shook with a firm, resolute grip. For the next hour, over cups of bitter coffee that left a tang on the tongue, Ms. Alder shared her observations. "The children, they're different," she began, her voice tinged with a mix of awe and fear. "It's as if they're being primed for something beyond our comprehension. They solve problems meant for much older students, exhibit empathy levels atypically high for their age. It's systematic, Commander, deliberately cultivated." Jaylen listened, his mind racing as he absorbed every word. The soft buzz of the cafe's aging fluorescent lights provided a counterpoint to the gravity of their conversation. Each revelation added layers to the puzzle, and Jaylen found himself both grateful for her courage and wary of the implications of her words. As they parted, the chill of the night seemed to seep deeper into his bones, a physical echo of the cold realization settling in his heart. The walk back to the outpost was a sensory blur, his footsteps echoing on the pavement, the distant howl of a lone animal punctuating the night, and the lingering taste of coffee a bitter reminder of the dark brew of secrets surrounding the town's children. Back at his desk, Jaylen sat in the quiet, the only sounds the occasional rustle of paper and his own steady breathing. The pieces were slowly forming a coherent image, yet with each piece placed, the picture grew increasingly ominous. As he looked over his notes, the shadows of the room seemed to stretch towards him, as if eager to swallow the truths he was uncovering. The shadows of uncertainty that stretched across Jaylen's desk seemed to deepen as he pieced together the information Ms. Alder had provided. Outside, the night had settled into a silent watchfulness, the stars obscured by a creeping fog that rolled in from the surrounding woods. It blanketed the town in a dense, moist haze, the dampness clinging to the windows and seeping into the bones of the old outpost. With dawn, the fog turned the world monochrome, a visual representation of the ambiguity that now colored Jaylen's mission. He stepped outside, letting the cool mist envelop him, its touch almost tangible against his skin. The soft, wet earth underfoot left a tangible residue, reminding him that every step he took in this investigation left a mark, seen or unseen. Today, he would delve deeper into the heart of the town's secrets. His destination was the school's administrative building, a repository of records and data that Ms. Alder suggested might hold keys to understanding the anomalous development of the children. As he approached, the building loomed, its facade more imposing under the weight of his purpose. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with the scent of old paper and fading disinfectant. Jaylen moved silently through the corridors, his presence unnoticed by the few staff members preoccupied with the start of their day. He found the records room tucked away behind a nondescript door, the lock giving way easily under the subtle manipulation of his tools. The room was a cavern of information with rows of filing cabinets standing like silent sentinels guarding their contents. Jaylen's fingers traced the labels, his touch light, as if the papers might crumble under too firm a grip. He drew out files meticulously, scanning through them with a practiced eye, absorbing the data, attendance logs, psychological evaluations, teacher notes, all forming a mosaic of abnormal excellence and eerie perfection. The air grew heavy with the dust of disuse as he worked, each breath a reminder of the decay that sometimes lay beneath the surface of idyllic exteriors. His eyes itched from the strain and the dust, but he persisted, driven by the need to unearth the truth buried in these analog crypts. A folder marked Special Programs caught his attention, its contents a stark deviation from the mundane records. It detailed a series of advanced cognitive development exercises and psychological conditioning sessions, not meant for young minds. The descriptions were clinical, cold, and calculating, painting a picture of orchestrated manipulation with precision and devoid of any ethical considerations. As Jaylen absorbed the implications, the silence of the room seemed to pulse with the weight of his discoveries. The soft creak of the building settling, the distant sound of footsteps, and the faint whispers of staff in the hallways created a backdrop of normalcy that clashed with the revelations unfurling in the dim light. Exiting the building with the folder securely tucked away, Jaylen felt the fog beginning to lift, both literally and metaphorically. The emerging clarity brought with it a chilling realization. The children were part of an experiment far more complex and sinister than anyone outside these secretive circles could have imagined. As he made his way back to the outpost, the fresh air tasted sharp with the tang of imminent rain, cleansing yet foreboding, hinting at the storm of confrontation that was brewing on the horizon. As Jaylen navigated his way back to the outpost, the rain began to fall, each drop a cool kiss against the heated skin of his face, washing away the dust of old records and perhaps, symbolically, the veils that had obscured the truth. The world around him seemed to pulse with a renewed vibrancy, the rain invigorating the earth, coaxing a fresh, clean scent from the soaked soil and revitalizing the foliage that lined his path. Upon returning, Jaylen laid the folder on the table with a definitive thud, its contents a tangible testament to his morning's efforts. Cole looked up, his expression a mix of anticipation and dread. Without a word, Jaylen spread the documents across the surface, each page a piece of the puzzle they were desperately trying to solve. The room was quiet, save for the rhythmic tap of rain on the window and the rustling of paper as they examined the files. "This is it, Cole," Jaylen said, his voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside him. "This isn't just advanced teaching, it's conditioning, programming almost. These kids are being molded into something we've not seen before." Cole leaned in, his fingers brushing against a particularly damning report of a psychological assessment. "They're turning these children into what? Soldiers, thinkers, controllers." His voice was tinged with incredulity, each word heavy with the moral weight of their discovery. "We need to break this open, expose whatever's really going on," Jaylen declared, his resolve hardening. The mystery of the children's abilities was unraveling, but the implications of their use and potential misuse cast a long shadow over his thoughts. Determined, they devised a plan to infiltrate deeper into the network behind these programs. It would require precision and discretion, traits Jaylen had honed over years of service. That night, under the cover of a relentless downpour, they set out toward the heart of the town, where the administrative offices of the school district housed the digital archives. The building was a fortress of modern bureaucracy by day, but at night it transformed into a silent monolith under the assault of the rain. Jaylen and Cole moved through the shadows, their movements a whisper against the symphony of the storm. The air was charged, each breath a mix of damp and anticipation, the coolness biting as they approached the rear entrance. Jaylen picked the lock with practiced ease, the soft click of the mechanism a minor victory in their covert operation. Inside, the air was stale, untouched by the cleansing rain outside. They navigated the dimly lit hallways to the main server room, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm they had left behind. With Cole keeping watch, Jaylen worked on accessing the digital records, his fingers flying over the keyboard with a fluency born of necessity. The screen before him flickered to life, bathing his face in a ghostly glow as rows of data scrolled down. "Got it," he whispered, almost afraid to break the hush. The files began downloading, each one potentially the key to unlocking the full scope of the project. Just as the transfer completed, a sudden noise, a door slamming somewhere in the building, jolted them back to the reality of their trespass. "Time to go," Cole hissed, and they retreated, their exit as silent as their entry, the documents secured, and their mission far from over. As they disappeared into the rain-soaked night, the mystery deepened, the weight of their discovery pressing down like the storm clouds above, promising more turbulence ahead. As Jaylen and Cole melted into the veil of the night, their hearts pounded not just from the exertion, but from the gravity of what they had unearthed. The documents tucked securely under Jaylen's coat felt heavier with each step, saturated with the potential to unravel the meticulously woven tapestry of secrecy surrounding the children's training. Back at the outpost, the storm had subsided, leaving in its wake a serene stillness that belied the storm of revelations the two men were about to confront. Inside, they spread out the freshly obtained documents under the stark white light of the room, the pages casting long shadows on the walls, as if the secrets they held were trying to escape into the darkness. The data was extensive: project outlines, funding memos, correspondence between unknown officials, and disturbingly detailed reports on the children's progress and psychological conditioning painted a chilling picture. The project was not just a local anomaly, but part of a broader, more sinister network. The children, selected for their innate abilities, were being shaped into something beyond mere intellectual prodigies. "They're building an army," Cole murmured, his voice a mix of awe and horror as he flipped through a particularly explicit file detailing neural enhancement techniques. Not of soldiers, but of strategists, manipulators capable of controlling the very fabric of society. Jaylen's hands trembled slightly as he organized the files, the tactile sensation of the paper stark against his skin. Each document, each byte of data added weight to their mission, solidifying their resolve. We have to expose this, Cole, before it's too late. The next morning, with the fresh sunlight casting a hopeful glow through the windows, Jaylen contacted his superiors. His report was concise, each word measured, each sentence a careful construct of their findings. The response was immediate and decisive, a directive to secure the evidence and prepare for extraction. But as the day wore on, an unsettling silence took hold. No further instructions came. The usual bustle of communication ceased. The air inside the outpost grew thick, the tension palpable. The aroma of stale coffee did little to mask the scent of their growing anxiety. By nightfall, it was clear something was amiss. Jaylen's attempts to reach his contacts met with static silence, the digital ether as empty as the dark sky outside. "We're on our own," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil swirling within him. Determined to not let their discovery vanish into the shadows from which it had emerged, Jaylen devised a new plan. They would leak the information to the media, expose the project to the world's eyes. As they prepared the data packets, the soft clicks of the keyboard were like the ticking of a clock, counting down the moments until their next move. Just as they were about to transmit the files, the power cut out. Darkness enveloped them, a tangible cloak of uncertainty. The faint glow of the moon filtering through the windows was their only light, casting eerie patterns on the walls. "Incoming!" Cole's voice cut through the darkness just as the sound of vehicles approached. They were no longer just observers in the shadows. They had become targets, their discovery too dangerous to remain hidden. As they scrambled for their contingency plans, the mystery of the children's true purpose loomed larger, a daunting specter that was now hunting them down. In the engulfing blackness, Jaylen and Cole's senses sharpened to the brink as the ominous growl of engines surrounded the outpost. With no time to spare, they grabbed the encrypted drives, the cold metal a stark reminder of the gravity of their situation. Their only chance now lay in escape and evasion. Cole whispered urgently, navigating by memory in the pitch-dark room. "Back door now." "It's our best shot." They moved stealthily, every step deliberate, avoiding the usual creaks of the aged wooden floorboards, guided by the faint moonlight spilling through cracks in the infrastructure. Outside, the chill of the night air bit into their skin, the ground beneath their boots soft and yielding from the day's earlier rain, leaving faint, damp impressions of their hurried steps. The scent of wet earth rose up, mingling with the sharp tang of pine, creating an almost invigorating mix that contrasted sharply with the adrenaline coursing through their veins. Reaching the tree line just as the first vehicles stormed into the clearing in front of the outpost, their headlights cutting bright swaths through the darkness, Jaylen and Cole plunged into the forest. Branches snapped underfoot, their sharp cracks piercing the night like gunfire. Behind them, shouts and the sound of boots on the ground indicated that their escape had been noticed. With the dense trees as their only cover, they pushed deeper into the woods, the underbrush scratching at their faces and hands, leaving thin trails of blood mingled with sweat. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches like fingers trying to hold them back, roots ready to trip them at every step. "We need to split up," Jaylen said, breathless, as they paused momentarily under the cover of a large oak. "It'll increase our chances. Head for the ridge and use the satellite phone to call for extraction." Cole nodded, his face set in grim determination. "Meet you there by dawn. Watch your back, Jaylen." With a mutual nod, they separated, each disappearing into the shadowy depths of the forest. Jaylen moved with a predator's grace, his senses hyper-alert. The forest's nocturnal sounds were now a backdrop to his focused mind. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures disturbed by the chaos, the whispering leaves speaking of danger at every turn. As he navigated through the undergrowth, the faint glow of his watch the only light, the distant sounds of pursuit grew sporadic, then alarmingly close. Ducking behind a thicket, Jaylen caught his breath, the cold air searing his lungs. He could smell the mossy dampness of the forest floor, feel the uneven ground beneath his prone body, hear the soft tread of boots searching. His heart pounded in his ears, not just from the exertion but from the weight of the secrets he carried. The drive pressed against his chest, a constant reminder of the stakes. As he lay there, hidden by the night and the forest, the first hints of dawn touched the sky, turning it from black to a deep, brooding blue. He knew the next few hours would determine everything. As the light grew, so would the danger, but also the hope of reaching the rendezvous point, and with it, a chance to bring the truth to light. The mystery of the children's fate, and his own, hung in the balance, suspended in the dim light of the approaching dawn. As dawn's first light filtered through the dense canopy, Jaylen navigated the forest's underbrush with a silent urgency. The coolness of morning settled around him, mixing with the earthy scent of the forest floor, rich with fallen leaves and pine needles. His senses remained on high alert. Every sound, a bird's startled flight or a distant branch breaking under a foot, caused him to pause, assess, and adjust his path. Emerging from the tree line, Jaylen caught sight of the ridge ahead, its silhouette a jagged line against the softening sky. His muscles ached from the night's exertions, and his mouth felt dry, the taste of adrenaline still sharp on his tongue. Pushing forward, he kept his pace steady, the ground beneath his boots becoming rockier as he ascended. Above, the sky transformed from the deep indigo of night to a pale blue, streaked with the first hints of orange and pink. The air grew thinner, crisper, and the wind carried a whisper of freedom that spurred him on. As he reached the crest of the ridge, he scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of Cole or the extraction team. Suddenly, a crackle broke the silence, a static-filled whisper in his earpiece. "Jaylen, position?" It was Cole, his voice strained but clear. "Top of the ridge, no sign yet of the team," Jaylen responded, keeping his voice low. "Copy that. I'm 5 minutes out. Keep your head down, they're still on our tail." Jaylen crouched among the rocks, the rough, cold surfaces biting into his palms. His breaths came in visible puffs as he surveyed the path he had traveled, watching for any movement. The quiet was deceptive, a serene veil over the danger that lurked just out of sight. Minutes stretched on, each second a drawn-out beat in the symphony of tense anticipation. Finally, the sound of subtle footsteps approached from the opposite side of the ridge. Jaylen tensed, ready to spring into action, but relaxed as Cole's familiar figure emerged from the tree line, moving with cautious speed. They exchanged a quick, silent nod as Cole joined him in his lookout. "No sign of them yet, but we can't wait much longer," Cole murmured, his eyes scanning the back trail. Just then a distant hum, not of engines but the low buzz of an approaching drone, reached their ears. "Time to move," Jaylen said, and they began their descent down the far side of the ridge, the terrain steep and treacherous. As they navigated the rocky decline, the sun crested the horizon, bathing the landscape in a warm, golden light that made the dew-laden grass sparkle. Each step was precarious, the loose stones underfoot threatening to give way at any moment. Reaching the bottom, they found themselves in a shallow valley, the ground leveling out. Here, the grass was tall and wet, clinging to their pants, the moisture a cold caress against their skin. The drone's buzz grew louder, more insistent, and they quickened their pace, knowing that cover was limited and time was running out. Up ahead, hidden by a small copse of trees, the faint outline of their extraction vehicle became visible, its disguised form a beacon of hope. They pushed through the last few meters, lungs burning, legs aching, driven by the desperate desire for safety and the need to bring their findings to light. As they reached the vehicle, the back door swung open, a silent invitation to safety. They slipped inside, the door closing with a soft thud behind them, sealing them away from the pursuit that was too close for comfort. Inside, the faint smell of oil and metal welcomed them, a stark contrast to the forest's natural perfume. As the vehicle pulled away, hidden beneath its camouflage, Jaylen and Cole shared a look of weary relief, their mission's burden still heavy upon them, but their resolve unbroken, fueled by the rising sun. The vehicle sped away, weaving through the understory with barely a whisper, its surface mirroring the early morning light and shadows of the dense forest. Inside, Jaylen and Cole sat in a tense silence, the hum of the electric motor a soft backdrop to their rapid breaths. The smell of damp earth and fresh pine still lingered on their clothes, a stark reminder of their close escape. As the initial adrenaline subsided, Jaylen turned his attention to Cole. "We need to regroup and plan our next steps carefully," he said, his voice low but firm. Cole nodded, his face set in a grim line, his mind already turning over their options. They reached a safe house, a nondescript cabin hidden deep in the woods, by mid-morning. The place was sparsely furnished, the air inside cool and musty from disuse. They went straight to work, spreading out maps and documents on the rough wooden table that dominated the small living area. "The first thing we need to do is secure a communication line that hasn't been compromised," Jaylen stated, scanning the digital displays that showed encrypted networks. He set up a portable scrambler, ensuring that their discussions remained cloaked from any prying ears. Cole, meanwhile, pulled up satellite imagery of their targets, key facilities where the children's training programs were administered. "These are our points of leverage. If we can expose what's happening inside, it could spark enough outrage to halt the project," he proposed, pointing to a cluster of buildings marked in red. Jaylen considered this, his eyes tracing the routes in and out of the facilities. "We'll need solid evidence. That means getting inside one of these places and filming what's happening. We might only get one shot at this." The planning was meticulous. They opted for a two-pronged approach. Jaylen would infiltrate the main facility under the guise of a security inspector, using forged credentials they prepared earlier. Cole would coordinate from the outside, handling communications and extraction. They rehearsed every scenario, from entry and data collection to unexpected encounters and emergency exits. The smell of coffee brewed over an old stove filled the cabin, mixing with the scent of old wood and pine resin seeping through the walls as they finalized each detail. As dusk fell, casting long shadows through the cabin's single window, Jaylen checked his equipment one last time. Night vision goggles, a high-definition pinhole camera, and a backup drive for data storage were all securely packed in his lightweight vest. "Remember, timing is crucial," Cole reminded him as they stood by the door, ready to part ways. "Sync every 15 minutes. If anything goes wrong—" "I know," Jaylen interrupted, a determined glint in his eye. "But we won't let it come to that." With a firm pat on the shoulder, Cole watched as Jaylen disappeared into the encroaching darkness, the door closing with a soft click behind him. Outside, the chirping of crickets filled the air, their song a natural counterpoint to the high stakes of the mission ahead. Back inside, Cole sat down at the communication setup, his fingers poised over the keyboard. The screen in front of him displayed a map, blinking dots indicating Jaylen's progress. As he monitored the signals, his resolve hardened. They were set on exposing the truth no matter the cost. Under the cover of night, Jaylen approached the high-security facility with deliberate steps, each movement calculated and silent. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of industrial solvents from nearby manufacturing plants. The sky above was a blanket of darkness, dotted with sparse stars obscured occasionally by the drifting smoke from the stacks. Once at the perimeter, Jaylen paused, taking in the chain-link fence topped with razor wire that loomed ominously against the night sky. He slipped on a pair of gloves, the fabric whispering against his skin, and retrieved a compact bolt cutter from his vest. Working quickly and quietly, he snipped a section of the fence, creating just enough space to slip through without altering the overall appearance of the barrier. Inside the compound, he kept to the shadows, moving with the stealth of a shadow himself, mindful of the gravel beneath his boots that threatened to betray his presence with a careless step. His target was the main research building, where he knew the most sensitive operations were conducted. The structure stood stark against the night, its windows dark, as if it were watching him approach. Reaching the building's service entrance, Jaylen used a lockpick set, the tools cold and precise in his hands. The lock gave way with a soft click, and he slipped inside, finding himself in a dimly lit corridor lined with pipes and gauges that hissed softly, their readings unnoticed in the late hour. He navigated the hallway with a map etched in his memory, turning corners with practiced ease until he reached the central control room. Here, the air was stale, tinged with the metallic scent of electronics. Jaylen set up his equipment swiftly, a laptop to access the network, a series of small high-definition cameras to document his findings, and an encrypted drive to store the data securely. The computer systems hummed softly in the quiet room as he breached the security protocols, his fingers flying over the keys in a rhythmic dance. Screens flickered to life, revealing schedules, project files, and most crucially, live feeds from hidden cameras within the facility that showed areas not included in any public floor plans. As he downloaded the files, Jaylen kept one eye on the door, his body tensed for any sign of interruption. The minutes stretched out, each second a drip of time that filled the room with an invisible pressure. Then, without warning, the soft buzz of his communicator vibrated against his chest. He glanced at the message from Cole. "Extraction in 20. Be ready." Files secured, Jaylen wiped down the laptop, leaving no fingerprints or traces of his intrusion. He dismantled his temporary setup, repacking the gear with efficient motions. As he exited the control room, his senses remained heightened, attuned to every shift in the air or faint noise that could signify discovery. Making his way back through the maze of corridors, Jaylen felt the weight of the drive against his chest, its contents a potential catalyst for monumental change. He emerged into the cool night air, the smell of freedom tinged with the lingering fear of pursuit. With steady breaths, he retraced his steps, blending into the darkness as he made his way to the rendezvous point where Cole and the promise of safety awaited. Emerging from the shadowy embrace of the forest, Jaylen met Cole at the predetermined rendezvous point, their breaths visible in the cold night air. Cole's nod was all the confirmation Jaylen needed. Their plan was still on track, and it was time for the final move. Their next hours were spent in a makeshift command center, poring over the data Jaylen had extracted. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, they prepared their broadcast to the world. Every document, every video clip they had secured was set to expose the truth behind the manipulation of the children, a revelation that would shake the foundations of societies across the galaxy. With the push of a button, the information streamed across various networks, unstoppable and irrefutable. Jaylen watched the screens, his heart pounding, as news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting the shocking revelations to millions. As the world reacted, Jaylen and Cole found themselves at the center of a storm they had unleashed. But there was one final piece to their plan. Addressing the world directly, Jaylen stepped in front of the camera, his figure framed against the backdrop of the morning light that streamed into their hideout. "People of Earth and beyond," Jaylen began, his voice steady and clear. "Today we've shown you undeniable proof of the potential within your children, manipulated by those who sought to shape the future for their own ends. But true strength lies in the untampered spirit of your youth, in their creativity and resilience that thrives under the light of freedom, not in the shadow of coercion." His words resonated, a call to arms for parents, for leaders, for anyone who had watched with a mixture of awe and horror. Let this be the moment we choose to foster, not control, to inspire, not coerce. Our children are our future, and it is our duty to protect and empower them, to let their true potential flourish. As the broadcast ended, the silence in the command center was profound, filled only with the soft rustle of leaves outside and the distant calls of morning birds. Jaylen and Cole exchanged a look, a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction between them. They had done more than expose a conspiracy. They had potentially redirected the course of human development towards a future where such manipulation was unthinkable. Their escape from the hideout was quiet, almost anticlimactic, as they left the cabin behind, stepping into a world that was already changing. News of their revelation spread, debates raged, and policies were questioned. Through it all, the image of children playing freely, their laughter genuine and unforced, became a symbol of hope and renewal. As they walked away, the rising sun cast long shadows on the path ahead, the light overwhelming the darkness, a metaphor for the journey humanity was about to embark upon. Jaylen felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a cautious optimism. The battle to protect the future had just begun, but they had given humanity the tools to fight it on their own terms. "Turns out," Jaylen said, turning to Cole with a slight smile, "human children are indeed more powerful than most species adults, not because of what was done to them, but because of what they can achieve when we believe in them. And with that, they stepped forward into a world ready to be reshaped, just as the first true light of day swept away the remnants of darkness. As Jaylen and Cole stepped into the new dawn, the world around them was already transforming. The air buzzed with conversations, digital and real, about the revelations they had unleashed. People everywhere were reevaluating the potential of the youngest among them, not as weapons but as wonders of creativity and hope. In the days that followed, Jaylen found himself at the heart of a movement. No longer just a whistleblower, he was now a spokesman for a cause that had gripped the galaxy. At a global assembly with leaders from every nation and representatives from interstellar alliances, Jaylen stood once again before a camera, the weight of his words as significant as ever. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have seen in the shadows of manipulation is the darkest use of our greatest assets, our children. But in the light of our revelations, we see the boundless potential for good, Jaylen declared, his voice resonant, echoing across the silent hall. Let this be the era where we nurture, where we protect, and where we inspire, not for what they can give us, but for what they aspire to become. Applause broke out, sweeping through the crowd like a wave, as Jaylen's words touched hearts and ignited visions of a better future. Screens around him lit up with messages of support, commitments from leaders to dismantle the coercive programs and to invest in education and welfare systems that fostered individual growth and creativity. Backstage after the speech, Cole clapped Jaylen on the back, a grin spreading across his face. "You did it, man. You actually did it." Jaylen smiled, but his eyes were thoughtful, gazing out at the skyline. "We've started something new, Cole. It's up to us all to keep it moving forward." Weeks turned into months and the changes were palpable. Schools transformed their curricula to focus on encouraging critical thinking and emotional intelligence. Communities formed networks to support the free development of children, emphasizing arts, sciences, and emotional wellness over rote learning and competition. In a quiet, peaceful neighborhood, Jaylen watched children playing in a park, their laughter genuine and free from any hidden agenda. Parents watched on, no longer anxious but proud and hopeful. Jaylen's heart swelled at the sight, a stark contrast to the tension-filled days of their mission. Turning to leave, he was stopped by a young girl who approached him with a curious smile. "Are you Jaylen? The man who told everyone about how special we are?" she asked, her eyes wide with a mix of innocence and insight. "Yes, I am," Jaylen answered, kneeling to meet her gaze. "Thank you," she said earnestly. "My mom and dad say we can be anything now, that we're not just future soldiers or smart machines." Jaylen nodded, deeply moved. "And they're right. You can be anything." As he walked away, the girl's laughter blended with the sounds of other children, a melody more potent than any manifesto. It was the sound of potential being realized, of futures being reclaimed, of a generation finally allowed to define itself. In the twilight of his career, with the shadows growing long, Jaylen knew this was his legacy, not the secrets he had exposed, but the freedom he had helped to return to those who needed it most. Turns out, human children are indeed more powerful, he reflected quietly, not because of how they are shaped, but because of how they are allowed to grow.